Welcome to Plus One Forward, the podcast powered by the apocalypse, where we talk about tabletop role-playing games using or inspired by the Apocalypse engine. I'm your MC, Rich, and I'm joined by my co-MC, Rach Shelke. Hey, Rach, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How about you, Rich?
I cannot complain. Excited to be back on the mics.
Oh yeah, it's been a long holiday season, but I think we're through it finally.
Yay. I think you've got a topic to introduce. Why don't you tackle it, Rach?
Yeah, we were batting some ideas back and forth, and something that came to mind was back when Avery Alder was preparing to launch her Monster Hearts 2 Kickstarter, she released a survey just to collect information about how members of the gaming community interacted with the first edition of Monster Hearts, what type of stories they were telling with the game, what type of games they were playing, because there were some variants that occurred, the skins they loved, the skins they disliked, and other problems and joys they had encountered with the game. When she posted the survey results later, she commented, and I quote, "I was honestly surprised to learn that so many people play campaigns of Monster Hearts. The majority of respondents had played in campaigns, many, 271, in campaigns of 6 or more sessions. The thought that long-term play was so surprising really stuck with me. At the time, I had encountered a school of thought with Apocalypse World that acknowledged that the game was really good in short campaign and one-shots, but that it truly shined once you got to about 10 sessions or so.
Yeah.
At that point, the characters would be, in theory, over their heads in complex situations and relationships, and the players would be eager to see what amazing and terrible things happen next. As a community organizer, I found that the holy grail to new community members and returning players who haven't played in a while is to find a group that can sustain long-term play. That goes for all RPGs, not just powered by the Apocalypse games. One-shots can give players a taste of gaming, fix as it were, but it doesn't really support the prolonged emotional and creative investment that some people in the community are looking for. In this episode of Plus One Forward, we want to talk a little bit about long-term play empowered by the Apocalypse games from a player perspective. It's a really big topic, this idea of long-term play. We initially sketched out talking about the MC position, but there was so much player material that's probably going to be a later episode.
Exactly. We may throw in a few MC tidbits because I think the two are inextricably linked at parts, but primarily player-focused. I think that's the way to go.
Exactly. Rich, what topic did you want to bring up first in regards to long-term play?
Well, before we go to topic, I just have to throw in Avery's surprised me. You know, I played a Monster Hearts campaign of 21 sessions run by Kelly Vanda, and it was amazing. It's so enriching, and so I'm glad that we're talking about long-term play because Powered by the Apocalypse can be really fun as a one-shot, but man, it's built to really fire, like you said. 6 to 10 sessions and even going longer with some of the games.
Yeah.
The first thing that I think of when I look at a playbook or a skin or a hunter playbook is those advanced improvements, right? You get 5 XP, you get an advancement after 5 advancements. This whole thing unlocks unlockable way of going into the advanced improvements. They're all handled differently, right? Apocalypse World was the first. And then, correct me if I'm wrong in my history of PBTA games, but Monster Hearts was the first one that really talked about seasons.
I think it was Monster of the Week. I'd have to go back and check, because I think came out around the same time. I think talked about a little bit. I use I think because I'm not quite sure off the top of my head, but I know it talked about the idea of having the countdown clock structure for a overarching plot, sort of like the mythology arcs that you see with X-Files, other TV shows of that genre it's trying to work with. But I do remember Monster Hearts and its season structure sticking out because it's so tied to the advanced improvements. For those who aren't familiar with Monster Hearts, you level up 5 times and then you unlock the season advances. But that also signifies to the GM that this is the end of this storyline, of the season of the story. And the game will wrap up shortly thereafter. If you follow up what Avery has written, go on a short break before you dive into season 2 or 3 or so on.
Exactly. So let's tackle some of the more common advanced moves that are out there. This one exists in games like Apocalypse World, Monster Hearts, Masks, Urban Shadows, and Monster of the Week. For example, there are others. Those are the ones that we glanced at to pull our notes. Retiring a character to safety. Now, you've got a note in here. It's boring. Is that right?
Retiring to safety is your automatic default. I think it's a little boring. I like seeing where my characters go when the stakes are high and their backs are against the wall. That's my favorite space to play in. So to piece out of a game is kind of like ending it early for me.
You're such a drama llama. I hear you, but I love what Urban Shadows says. Sooner or later, everything ends. When you select this option, your character's current story arc ends. In the case of retiring your character or moving through to the other side, you get to describe what your safety looks like. You might return to Arcadia, leave the city forever, or just give the game up completely. No matter what you decide, the MC can't use your character as a threat or put you into danger from this point out. Safety means safety, even on these dark streets. I like that idea. There are times when I feel like this character's story is done. I had one character that I retired to safety. It was a faceless named Orc. I know, right? It's like my dream faceless. I can never play face. Not only did I retire that character to safety, I don't feel like I can play the playbook anymore because I got exactly what I wanted out of the faceless playbook, which is one of my favorite playbooks. Orc started off with a list of people to take out who had maimed and destroyed his life, and Orc came to a point where he killed the ones he was going to kill and let a few of them live for various reasons, and that was when he should retire to safety. I didn't want him to come back. I didn't want anything to taint my memory of this character's arc. I really wanted to take that narrative into my own hands and say, let's tell other stories. Let's not make this the next Moonlighting and keep bringing them back. And it made me really happy to feel like I played Orc to completion, right? I got all of the cool bits for Orc, got the special gold armor, and everything from the legendary set. So I hear you that that's not something, it just happened that one time, right? That's the only time it ever felt good to me. But I love that option exists.
How do you feel about other games like Masks, for example, where retire from being a superhero is an option, but you can also become a paragon of the city? Or Apillion has it as that's your final level out of the game. With Apillion, you're playing baby dragons, so you eventually grow up to the point where you're a statue or you're something, just sort of like a presence that the younger generations come to for advice, where your character is retired, but in a position of wisdom and not quite authority, but definitely wisdom and respect.
I love it. I think that is perfect for Masks. It is an excellent way to see that young superhero become what they wanted to be, and then to have a legacy that remains for the continuation of the game. I would say generally I would prefer something like that than retiring to safety. What about you?
I think it's kind of cool. It's something that I feel would have a space if a longer running campaign, or with Apillion, it's very much a generational thing where you are this paragon for these baby dragons that are going to come after you. And that says to me, there might be another story that comes after. Mm-hmm. I would be interested to see what does that world look like when you are going through and seeing the world after the first group of characters have changed it, and seeing like what's different about the social landscapes, what's different about politics, for lack of any better description.
Very cool. Let's move on and talk a little bit about the grown-up moves and the adult moves. So grown-up moves exist in Monster Hearts. We already talked about that. Mm-hmm. Masks has adult moves. I think both of them serve similar functions within their particular games.
Yeah, they very much capture the spirit of what those games are about.
Right. Both of them are about not understanding the world, being confused about who you are and how you fit in the world. And the growing up moves, the adult moves, give you a new way to interact. You mechanically can show that you've learned how to handle your environment, how to handle your peers, how to handle those who are perhaps above you or older than you, however you want to consider it.
I think it says something about how your character also is more aware of how they handle themselves. Particularly, like Monster Hearts resonates a lot with me because if you, from an MC perspective, we're going to fit a little bit of MC discussion into here.
Mm-hmm.
I like looking at those moves and coming to the realization player characters technically can't act on those actions. They can emulate the actions of adulthood, but they don't have the same narrative consequences and rewards that being an adult is because they're teenagers and grappling a little bit internally and externally with, well, what do I do as a person? I really love the growing up move, make others feel beautiful, which is a interesting reflection of turn somebody on.
Yeah.
Turning somebody on is a very selfish move. And with make others feel beautiful, when you get to 7 to 9s, it's a little bit loaded, but it's about uplifting people and making them feel better about themselves rather than, oh, this is for my own physical and emotional gain.
Yeah, and that's an interesting way of looking at the selfish versus the selfless, those two, how they interpose against each other. In Masks, I really love how the adult moves show an evolution in the understanding of yourself and how to interact with the world. You unleash your powers as a basic move. The adult move is you wield your powers. You roll the same stat, or you roll the same state, but the options are radically different. You don't have options to choose and unleash your powers, but you actually can choose options when you wield your powers. You have some kind of focus. You know what the heck you're doing. And I think that's awesome.
I love the adult move, stand up for something. Yeah, that really encapsulates what I think a story of a young superhero becoming a guardian and a protector of their city, to take a stand for something as an adult. Like, that really grabbed me and spoke to me.
Yeah, it is super cool. I just think the idea of Masks getting somewhere is really cool because I love Young Justice. I love that as one of the major inspirations for the Masks game. But I also love seeing the growth of the main characters from the first season to the second season. Seeing some of them who were still figuring out who they were become the mentors and team leaders for the next generation.
And I really think that the moves, having the ability to level up your basic moves, reflects that type of teenage superhero storytelling. I was a big fan of, a couple of years ago, there was a comic, Avengers Academy.
Oh, yes.
Which sometimes had sort of silly art. But that idea of these troubled teenagers trying to sort themselves out with these troubled adults really grabbed me and held my attention. And, oh, it was so good.
Jumping back to Monster Hearts, and this might be the last growing up move or adult move that I want to discuss, but I actually love the edge of, instead of shutting someone down, which is silencing them, right? Mm-hmm. Which is putting conditions on them, which is hurtful. You can still really stand up for something, but it's called call people on their shit.
Such a good move name.
It is. You're still rolling with cold. In fact, some of the results are similar, but there's just something about the evolution of that, about standing up for something that is kind of righteous, a little bit of just, bent on it versus trying to use it to hurt somebody. It's really cool.
Yeah, I think Avery in that section for the growing up talks about the moves are meant to give your character a language to talk about the toxic community they're part of and have contributed to. And now we're kind of aware of it because they're growing up and they're gaining that distance.
We have the retired to safety. We have the growing up or the season advancements, the growing up moves and the adult moves. There's another one here called changing your playbook.
It doesn't show up in all games, but it shows up in quite a few.
Yeah, switching skins or switching playbooks. You move from for 5 to 6 advances for 6 to 8, maybe game sessions, maybe more based on the amount of times you roll, that kind of stuff. You've played a gunlugger, or you've played a vampire, or you've played a legacy, and you decide within the fiction, or you decide mechanically, I would like to try out this other playbook or this other skin. what are some of the things that we should think about before transitioning and during that transition from one playbook or skin to another?
The most important thing, I think, is to actually take a step back and go over how your particular Powered by the Apocalypse game puts conditions on this playbook swap. Because in the process of reading up on a bunch of games for this particular episode, I was reading for Urban Shadows, and I didn't know that corruption carries over when you swap playbooks. It never has come up. I've always been a very good person in Urban Shadows. But it's like, oh yeah, your corruption carries over, and so you're playing an Oracle and you have 3 corruption moves. Well, you're going to go over to Scholar now and immediately mark off 3 corruption moves. You get those right away. You're still screwed. There's no way to get clean that way. And then with Masks, there's a lot of your moments of truth. With Masks, there's a lot of parts of the moments of truth that come up in leveling up that don't get turned back on just because you swap playbooks. Those stick in the fiction. That's your moment. It's not changing.
Yeah.
Just read up a little bit. And once you figure out how you're supposed to level up, there's a lot of things to consider, and it can be very challenging. For example, Rich, what do you do about stats? For example, I go from being a skinner to a chopper. That's a big jump, and the stats I want to focus on are going to be completely different. What stuff do you keep?
It depends, right? That's the horrible answer, but it's true, because if you go from Skinner to Gunlugger, you're going to go from someone with a high hot, probably not that great of a hard, to something where the Gunlugger and the Chopper both use the hard stat. So, yeah. Now, from a fiction standpoint, that could be the Skinner who, instead of working in the background, decided to step up and took hold of a gang, or decide to step up and pick up a gun, and your things go really badly when you engage those moves. And maybe that's what you as a playgroup find interesting. But personally, if I fail like 4 or 5 moves in a row, sure, we can fail forward as a group, and that's great. And in games when I get XP for a failure, it feels less terrible. But regardless, at some point, like, I want to feel like I'm contributing to the team. And so,
yeah, with the stats alone, I've done a couple of weird leaps in games. I try to make the playbook switch make narrative sense, at least statistically speaking. And I know we aren't supposed to be powered by the apocalypse. But you go for example, having a character with high hot to a playbook that doesn't really care about hot, it's kind of taken a big hit.
It is. And it takes away a lot of your narrative authority, right? A 6- is all well and good, but a 6- means you don't choose options unless it's really, really bad options, right?
Not good ones.
No, never the good ones. So that's something to keep in mind. And I'm not opposed to the idea, because most stats are very abstract. I'm not at all opposed to the idea of swapping out. If you have that Skinner go to Gunlugger, maybe you actually just strip out all of the stats of the Skinner and you look at the stat choices for the Gunlugger, and that's how you move in. Because I would assume that you have boosted a few of your stats along the way. That's one of the things that I do as a player. And if your stats are too high, that can be less fun over a long period.
I have done it where, again, planning ahead, and we shouldn't be power gaming story games, but I do like deciding, okay, I want to swap out this playbook for another one, and I take it on as a project because I love projects personally, but I have to sit there and go, okay, how am I going to spend my next few advances? What stats do I need to focus on for leveling up in order to make this make sense? So, for example, I was referencing I once went from Oracle, which has very high spirit in Urban Shadows, to Scholar, which cares not really for your spirit, but it's about mind. So there's a lot of opportunities to roll in character and struggle with that mind stat and go, oh, this is my character learning to interact with things differently, to see the world in a different way, and watch how that character grows. I think I did something similar in Apocalypse World, where I went from Driver, which is like the one damage-centric class that uses Sharp as a high stat, to Battle Babe. And that was very much about watching this character who let chaos happen around them and was sort of aware of where they were, but didn't really necessarily drive it forward, to someone who could command when violence occurred. And that was a fascinating thing. Couldn't really finish violence.
You survived it.
Yes.
But the thing that you point out, Rach, I think is really crucial. Is it interesting to you to go through the process of that oracle, learning how to be a scholar, failing along the way, and then having to take a few advances to boost up the stat of mind? Or is it more interesting as a player for you to just fill that niche, to step into that role and have access to those moves? And if that's what you and the group and the MC find more appealing, then maybe you do flip stats. Maybe you don't keep what you had before.
Yeah, it's all about that gaming as a conversation. You can go to the GM and say, can we swap these stats? Because this doesn't make sense for me anymore. Especially if you have characters who have very low stats, like the -1s. Mm-hmm. You don't necessarily want to go immediately into that, because that's going to be a long haul to really level up that character to the point where they're functional.
Yeah. Now, what about stuff? What about keeping stuff? Like the idea of a workshop or a gang.
It's all about the static stuff, and I think you have to think about how important that is to the story. If you're keeping your workshop-y moves, so if you're, for example, a savvy head and you're moving away from that, is that because your character has lost part of that affinity for technology? Is that important to your plot at that point? It could be, and then I would keep it. But if it isn't, Rich, would you drop it altogether?
Maybe. I mean, if it's not important anymore, maybe the workshop got blown up. Maybe the gang that I had, I lost the fight for leadership. I've always had that one guy who was itching to take over, and I wasn't there. And now when I come back, the gang isn't mine anymore. But they're still around.
You gave it to the MC. Oh, no. I don't remember if it's in the core book, but someone once painted a very evocative image to me of the hard holder who shifts it to driver, where she just gets into her car and drives away and leaves the hard hold behind. That no longer is part of that character, because narratively jettisoning the hard hold is very important to that character's arc at that point.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. I found Monster Hearts, she's talking about switching playbooks. Mm-hmm. I found Monster Hearts to be interesting vis-a-vis different skins existing. For earlier advancements, when you can take a move from another skin or playbook, I found it to be really tricky, because each of the skins in Monster Hearts versus Apocalypse World, where I feel like there's a theme, but each of the moves often can't exist within multiple different playbooks. In fact, you can see, oh, well, this is swap this stat for that, or this is a +1 to your thing, and it's called this for the gunlugger, but it's called this for the chopper, right? It's the same kind of deal. But within Monster Hearts, each of the skins are built very tightly around a theme. And so trying to take a bargain from the Infernal when you're not an Infernal, that takes some work. And you can do it, but it's not as easy. I found it to be tricky. The Queen and their connection to their gang. If you don't have a gang, like, how are you going to use streaming? Sure, we can work out a way to make it work, but it's not a drag and drop, in my opinion.
Oh, definitely not. Getting the moves, particularly in Monster Hearts, when you start buying them from other skins, requires a certain level of self-awareness and awareness of what your character is and what they're trying to do, and how you interpret what the theme and the reference to sort of teenage development in that particular skin is going to become important. I've seen, again, we've talked about power gaming a little bit. There was in an early Monster Hearts campaign where it used to annoy me to a great extent that some of our players were more combat focused and loved to go grab No Rest for the Wicked.
Oh, yeah.
Or another one on the Ghoul playbook where you can burn out all your hit points and then come back because you're not really dead. I'm like, why do we all have this move, people? Like, why are we fighting? I don't understand what this game is about anymore. Because there was a lot of weaponizing of playbooks. And at one point, I seem to recall one player turning to another saying, like, as a werewolf, why do you have this ability? How does that fit into your mythos of werewolves? That you can get blown up and come back like 2 minutes later.
Yeah, that actually touches on the note of taking a playbook move from a playbook that's currently active in play. Like the idea of everybody having no rest for the wicked, like I'm not super in love with that. Like,
no,
that's I can see how that could cause some problems.
Yeah, I remember somebody talking online years ago about having a battle babe who goes and gets a no-shit driver, I think, from the driver playbook and just becomes an unstoppable force of nature just for the sake of doing damage. I think there needs to be a little bit of thought and consideration as to why you're pulling these moves from other playbooks. Because I think there's, again, a lot of narrative space you can play around with there. Again, I go back to Urban Shadows and having, again, my scholar, and I think I took something from the Dragon playbook because it had become narratively important to say this character has a better understanding of what dragons were in our version of the Urban Shadows universe, and that is the reference there, is I have this dragon move because I get it now.
I actually, this is one of the, like, guilty confessions moments of my gaming career. I actually ended a Monster of the Week game because a player tricked me. They were playing a scholar who had their workshop was in the literal middle of nowhere. It was like this null field. And then they took a move from another playbook. They took from the Divine Angel Wings, which allows them to teleport to anywhere they've been before. And the second time that they took a major bad guy and just teleported them into the null field and teleported back and said, well, they're taken care of. I said, okay, great. And so's the game.
That's cheesy, man.
Yeah. Okay, I'll be honest. I actually asked the player, hey, how do you see this working? And we had a misunderstanding. I'll leave it at that. But yeah, be careful with playbook move combos and try to understand what the goal is for the player so that you guys are on the same page. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, I encountered this a little bit early in my Powered by the Apocalypse MCing career. And it's something that when we get to the MCing version of this episode, I want to go a little bit more into it. But as an MC, it forced me to be very aware of pulling my players aside and saying, so you have built an unstoppable force of nature in this one field of specialty. How do you want to be challenged? And as a player, yes, we can build characters who could be unstoppable badasses, but we should also consider, is just being able to roll 10 or higher every single time or have easy wins, is that what we want to get out of the game? Or should we look now at what flaws our character has in places where they can grow and explore? Because as an MC, that's where I want to poke.
Right. When you've worked out the game, the feeling of chance out of the equation, because, Rach, I saw in the notes that you put in, you actually did the research on what's the chance of failure with a +3 in a stat?
It is 8.77% chance.
Why aren't you playing a GM-less game at that point? Why do you want to engage the mechanics if you've engineered it to where there's almost no chance of anything other than one particular result?
I have seen it blow up in interesting ways. My spouse, Rob, played a battle babe in a short campaign that Kate of the Gauntlet ran of Apocalypse World and entered combat with just like an outrageous amount of +1s. And he sat back and said something along the lines of, I have engineered a situation of which I cannot be thwarted, and then rolled snake eyes. Kate was like, you have no idea how long I've been waiting for. The car runs over you. That's armor piercing. Your character is pretty much dead. Oh. However, that incident ended up spurring like a whole section of the game because it was all about dragging this battle babe's sorry beaten ass across the post-apocalyptic landscape in hopes of making it to the quarantine stasis where there was a med bay. And that whole arc, and just having, again, this tough character realize they are not unstoppable. They are a very moral creature, which is fascinating and humble, and it played out gloriously. Oh, it was such a good storyline. But always be prepared for your schemes of power gaming to explode, because that's when it's interesting.
Let's move on and talk about this other advancement that I've seen here for players. This advance exists for Apocalypse World 2nd Edition, Monster of the Week, and The Veil of the games that we reviewed, and that is create a second player character.
This is a weird one, but I love the quote in Apocalypse World for it. When you look up the section of the book that talks about this advance, it says, and I quote, "Oh, like it's a big shocker or so difficult to do. I mean, shit, you're the MC and you have 30 characters at a time and your players shy away from playing two? The real question is, why don't you usually play with more than one?" So it's a less common advance I found across the games like we looked through. Mm-hmm. Not all games have it. The Magpie games in particular don't seem to bring it up. And I think that as a advance, it runs counter to a lot of our gaming intuition. We were very focused on existing in a character's state of mind and existence and sort of living and breathing that character. And when you have two, Rich, do you think that cheapens the fact you have two characters to exist in instead of having the one to dump all your focus into?
I don't think it cheapens it, and here's why. As an MC, I really enjoy portraying multiple NPCs. And so the idea of portraying two PCs with some kind of firewalling or something to ensure that I'm not having a conversation with myself all the time, I have no personal problem with that. I can invest as much emotion in PC A as PC B and flip-flop back and forth between the two. What about you, Rach?
I was hesitant to this idea. I've explored it in play, but I explored it originally in really unusual circumstances. Now, before this episode, I reached out to the G Plus community and I was asking them, what's the longest Powered by the Apocalypse game? Did you play and what did you learn from it? And this is where I mentioned the secondary player characters. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people talked about, I played a game and it was about 6 sessions and then we hit scheduling issues and the game fell apart. Or it went 7 sessions and then we couldn't keep to a schedule. So when I was playing Apocalypse World a couple of years ago, we had this problem. We had a long-running game and there was actually 2 problems. The first problem was that there was about 5 of us, and we gamed with a lovely couple that was going through a lot of personal life changes, which meant their schedule was completely unpredictable. One of them was starting a new job with long commutes. There were some medical problems, and he would have to tap out of games at the last minute. And we were finding we were canceling the games. And the more you cancel a game, the less invested you get in the game over time, because you can't predict if you're going to be playing it. And then the second situation we had is we had a player who they were not one of these 2 that were causing scheduling issues, but they were another player who decided to pick a character that was a very high personal challenge for them, not the type of character they would normally latch onto, like a character that they wanted to really see where they could push how they were role-playing. And they struggled with that character. They found it hard to connect with the character. It didn't resonate with them. And they felt like they would come to the table and weren't sure what to do because the character's mindset was progressively becoming more foreign from their own. So the solution to both these problems was create secondary characters. So I ended up creating a second character. And this other player who was struggling with their touchstone created another character. And we started by saying, so what's an archetype that you will latch onto right away, that will not be a challenge, that runs a little bit close to how you are? Okay, we went with the angel. I built a character who had an immediate connection to this character. I was playing an operator, and we were playing them as like a father-daughter relationship, which was interesting. Mm-hmm. So there's immediate, strong relationship. And these characters became the main characters of a B-plot that would run in sessions where the rest of the party couldn't be there. And this did fascinating things. So the main party were not good people because it was Apocalypse World. They loved to burn bridges with NPCs. You have these 2 characters who had just sort of very passing relationships with the rest of the party. So I know like my operator had a bad business deal with another one of these characters, and we never explored what it was, and something terrible had happened. They never spoke of it again. So occasionally they would cross paths, but we could say, oh, here's this gunlugger from, this community that will not talk to the main party because we fucked up her community really bad. She'll happily work with these two people. And we get to understand, well, why was she so angry about the party selling them out? What did she really want for her community out of that? And answered a lot of questions and addressed a lot of things and fleshed out the world and all these great details. And, as I said, occasionally we would have the full table there and we would acknowledge these other two characters would show up. I think Apocalypse World says you can't really have conversations with yourself. You can't help or hinder yourself because that would be really gaming the system. You don't really have history with yourself. But it was really great to see a completely different facet of the world because this family relationship was not what the other party had. The other party was sort of a couple of jerks who ended up in the right place at the right time and were thrown together, rather than these two people who were trying to make a home for themselves in the world. So, to make a long story short, if you have never played two characters, I strongly suggest doing that because it will give you a fascinating perspective on what's going from your game to sort of take that lens and refocus it slightly to the left.
That is a really cool solution. For me, the only thing that I would just recommend the group take caution with is the amount of table time that a single player would take up. I say that because of personal experience. I was in a game with a Macaluso once. That's one of the limited playbooks I believe Vincent created. I tried to research to find out exactly. And the Macaluso is a custom playbook where the player character exists in 3 different bodies. And it's an awesome way to tie multiple PCs separated by distance or for whatever reason together. But then you've got one person who is playing that character and active all the time. And you have to be aware of that and make sure that everyone is comfortable with it. Because they're almost in a way like a co-MC, like a pocket MC in a way, because they're the conduit that kind of draws the overall plot together. And also the idea of asynchronous play when you've got a person in 3 bodies can be really challenging. So some things to think about, but Macaluso makes it even more tricky than a second character to play. I think it's a great idea if you have a sprawling campaign or a large world to have the second PC somewhere else, just like you said. I think that's really, really interesting.
Yeah, it is something, as you address it, you kind of have to be aware of how much screen time is given to these secondary characters. For us, like I said, it was mostly a B-plot thing, or at one point, my main party character ran away into the countryside. I don't remember why, but it's like, oh, well, this other character is more tied to the party and will occupy that space for the session until the other character comes back with, advanced story.
That's really fascinating. I think that's a great way. Hell, I could almost see a campaign engineered like you're gonna have 2 PCs. Let's go. Why not? According to Vincent and Miguel, why not?
So sort of a final point to explore is the idea of playing safe versus playing aggressively or playing risky, for lack of a better term. Do you burn out your characters in a long-term game, or do you play them close to your chest? In one-shots, I take the position that PCs are stolen cars, just like being an MC and NPCs.
Mm-hmm.
I really want to push them to see what happens because it only matters at this table right now, and then it will not matter going forward. But in long-term games, there has to be some consideration given to balancing risk while keeping your character going for a long time versus balancing the idea of my character would never do that, or my character would never put themselves in a position of danger. 2 Powered by the Apocalypse games with mechanics that explore this are Corruption in Urban Shadows and Luck in Monster of the Week. Corruption is when you have like a narrative trigger, and you have some moves that trigger off of it too, but it marks how deeply your character is seeping into the corruption of the urban fantasy underbelly of the city. And luck is literally how much you push your luck as a hunter and monster of the week, which you check mark it and you get like an auto success.
Mm-hmm.
But they're pacing mechanics. Rich, what are your thoughts on mechanics like this and just generally how much you push your character, particularly when you're aiming for long-term play?
7 luck is a lot. And the way in which I play Monster of the Week is spend the luck, but I make the character aware of the luck, on a meta level. And so once you start getting down to 2 or 3 luck, savor every single time, because they're no longer checking a box to be amazingly awesome. They are kicking the can just a little further down the road until they fade off, until they go off in the horizon, or until they end up buried. And it's probably buried. I mean, this Monster of the Week. Mm-hmm. This is your doom coming, right? Really big, nasty, ugly teeth doom coming your way. And so that can be an epic midpoint within a campaign. The fallout of a hunter that makes that sacrifice is fascinating to me. And the idea of, okay, what happens in the aftermath? We haven't finished the campaign. There's still X, Y, or Z to do. We're still interested in the story of those who are still there.
Mm-hmm.
That's really cool. And the idea of corruption, and that specifically in Urban Shadows, when you lose out to corruption, your character becomes a threat. And that means they become an MC character, and that is pretty great, right? How many different movies have we seen, and especially series have we seen, where friends become enemies, and that hurts so much more.
It's also, I loved when I was playing Urban Shadows, or running Urban Shadows, but mostly when I was playing, I loved watching people flinch and then mark that corruption because you knew something narratively had occurred. Corruption as a mechanic has more impact, I think, not when you push it, but when you make a conscious decision to tap it.
Mm-hmm.
I really loved, there was a point where my character and another character had a moment of intimacy, and the other character was a hunter. The hunter's intimacy moment was, you can ask them a question, and they have to tell truthfully. They can ask you a question back. You tell truthfully, or you mark corruption. And the question after sex was, hey, so are we still friends? And then marked corruption, saying, oh, no, of course we're friends. There isn't anything more to this relationship. But that was this moment of, oh, something big just happened narratively.
Oh, wow. Dang. That is really cool. That was a mic drop moment right there, Rach. So yeah, you burn out the luck. You go through the corruption track. That character isn't yours anymore, but you didn't get to retire them. They're either dead, and in Monster of the Week, that doesn't mean that they can't come back, right? Or they are a threat. You can make a new character. You can make new HX. You can work with the group and continue play. You can even be part of the legacy of the character that you have played before. A kid, a relative, someone inspired by, or someone that you helped in the past or hurt. So I think that there's still a rich amount of story after you burn through. So don't play safe. That's not what these games are made for. Don't play dumb, but don't hold it close to your vest, even if you know that you guys have planned on playing this for 10, 15, 20 sessions.
Be ambitious.
Absolutely. Well, Rach, I think that covers what we wanted to talk about for the player's side of long-term play for PBTA. Did you have any closing thoughts or anything else you wanted to bring up?
I think we covered a lot of ground in terms of getting a good focus of what rewards and challenges exist as you push your character further along. Not all games are going to last a long time. Some of them are going to be short, some of them are going to be one shots, some might fall apart after 4 sessions. But if you do get a game that lasts maybe a dozen sessions, enjoy it, get a good look at the places your character can go, and take joy from exploring all the different ways your character can change and grow over the story.
Absolutely. Well, Rach, thanks again for helping me and for having this conversation as we explore long-term play. It's been a pleasure.
I can't wait till we do our follow-up episode about emceeing in long-term games.
Plus One Forward is a production of the Gauntlet community, Richard Rogers and Rach Shelkey. You can find us at gauntlet-rpg.com or follow us on Twitter at @+1FWD. If you would like to support our show, visit our Patreon site at patreon.com/gauntlet. The games mentioned on this show use the Apocalypse engine, which is a creation of Vincent and Magay Baker. The music for Plus One Forward is from the Savage Aural Hotbed CD Gomi Daiko. The songs used are Gomi Daiko, Metal Version, and Hammer of Bill. You can find more amazing tunes by Savage Aural Hotbed on their website, www.savageauralhotbed.com.